6 of your Western Conference final appearances. And your team seemed to have an issue with scoring in that round.
Yeah.
And it's across multiple teams now. Is there
Yeah.
something about the system that I guess people figure out by the time you go that deep in the playoffs? Or, like, I guess, how do you look at what you can do to improve that track record?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think the same things apply. You score enough to win in the first round and the second round. There's no change in the third round other than the teams are better. And there's less room and there's less time and everybody's dialed in. So, I don't think there's a thing where a switch goes off in the third round. I just think you're down to the tiniest of margins. Sometimes the other team's better. Sometimes they're, a lot of times they're tighter, they're better defensively, they're getting better goaltending or they wouldn't be in the Final Four. So I think they kind of, go hand in hand. And that's why a lot of those games are, 2-1, 3-2. They're tight games. So there's always things you look at. I mean, I think in general, we didn't score enough in the playoffs like we did in the regular season. I think when you talk to scouting reports from other teams on us, I think they considered us a rush team. Got a lot of offense off the rush. You heard that consistently. And the reality is in the playoffs, rush dries up. You got to find other ways. Our power play was hot. We got some offense there, but you've got to find, the other offense outside of rush, and that's the hard offense. And that's in zone, getting to the net, the kind of offense that Florida's creating a lot of and has won with. So we've got to get more of that in our game. The other thing is I think there would have been some more rush there for us had we got leads in some games. Then the other team can't just defend and not, they took that away from us. When you're behind 15 out of the 18 games we played or whatever, just to start, you're chasing the game. It's a lot easier to defend rush when you've got a lead. When you're behind in a game, then you have to open it up a little bit to try and get back in, and that's where our rush, probably would have appeared a little bit more if we could have got into that situation.
You mentioned Florida. So Florida, throughout the whole season, they score in that way. They don't rely on the rush.
Yeah.
Do you feel like your team kind of develops maybe some habits over the course of the season?
Yeah, I think every team's built differently too. Every team's built differently, and there's not one way to do things. Like, because Florida won, we can't go, okay, let's become the Florida Panthers. Like, let's go, they've got some special ingredients there, that you just can't go out and get to play that way. So, I just think we probably need to be more of a hybrid. I think we relied too much on that piece, and when it became tough because of the circumstances, behind in games, other teams taking that away, we had trouble getting to that secondary way of creating offense.
Pete, where's the balance of the disappointment of not getting where you want to get ultimately in the Stanley Cup?
Yeah.
Having the success in Bo and Pete, because you guys had 3 years in a row, where's the balance in that?
Well, it's tough, right? I mean, it's raw. Listen, we're singularly focused, and that's on winning a Stanley Cup. So it's hard to balance anything less than that. The reality of this game is there's 32 teams, and only one of them, gets to be that team that is happy at the end of the year and is in a good spot. And everybody else, feels like they came up short. So, but you do have to have perspective. And, this group faced a lot of adversity this year with injuries and different things thrown at them. And they found a way to have a really good regular season. Despite that, it didn't go off the rails. Found a way to get through 2 excellent hockey teams in Colorado and Winnipeg in 2 series where, we probably weren't favored in either one. One was a President's Trophy winning team, and the other one, was a team that was one of the hottest teams down the stretch, and everyone was picking to win a Stanley Cup. So, there's a lot of pride in the work we did there. But, it's hard when you're singularly focused on a Stanley Cup to get past the disappointment of not getting there. And sometimes it takes time. Sometimes that perspective comes with time.
After Game 5, you said that you felt like you had seen a good enough of a sample size of Jake against the Oilers, and the status quo wasn't working. There's a pretty good chance you'll face them again in the playoffs. Do you feel like you can trust him against them?
Oh yeah. Listen, you know what? No one's a bigger fan of Jake Oettinger than me as a person or a goalie. Does that mean that he can't be coached or he doesn't have growth left in him? Absolutely. He's a young goalie. He's a young goaltender, and I think from a coaching perspective, we're 1-7 against that team at this time of year in the conference finals. So everything's on the table: lineup decisions, goaltending decisions, system decisions. Everything's on the table when you're looking for some type of way to flip that momentum, because it's not a small sample size. 1-7 is not a small sample size. So, but that's not just on Jake. That's on our entire group. I mean, we scratched veteran guys in order to try and change that. We moved guys up and down the lineup. We switched lines. We switched power play units. I mean, you're looking for solutions in order to try and flip that momentum. And the goaltending is one piece of that. I think Jake is the best young goaltender in the league. But that doesn't mean there's not still a learning curve and growth, and that's all part of the journey.
When you pull Jake, is there a process to that? Do you talk to Jeffries quickly or anything like that, or is that just a decision?
Sometimes we do. Sometimes we don't have time, So, sometimes we don't have time.
Game 5, obviously, emotions run higher. Are
Mm-hmm.
there any concerns about you and Jake and your working relationship after this Game 5 pull?
No, I mean, like I told you, I think we wouldn't have been in that spot without Jake. Just like we wouldn't have been in that spot without a lot of other guys in that room. That doesn't mean that they can't be coached or moved around as a piece in our group in order to try and keep moving the group forward. And we did that with a lot of our players. When I moved Jamie Benn to the fourth line, does that ruin our relationship? When I healthy scratched Dodonov, who I've had since he was 20 years old, does that ruin our relationship? No, those aren't easy conversations. They, as a player, you don't like that. I'm sure there's always some hard feelings, but those are, those are the decisions we make, and we try and keep it as professional as we can, and it's all with one goal, and that's to try and keep the group moving forward.
What was the conversation like with Jake, either after the game or today, whenever it happened?
Yeah, I haven't had a conversation with him yet. We haven't had a chance.
At that point in the game, you're down 3-1 in the series.
Yeah.
Going into it, your backs are against the wall in a lot of ways. Then, like
Yeah.
you said, you give up 2 quick goals. Then Casey comes in because
Yeah.
of another goal. Did you consider putting Jake back in to start the second?
Yeah, we
period?
considered, like I told you, everything's on the table at that point. Right? You're 1-7. You're down 3-1. You're just trying to get to Game 6. And I'll give you a little background, that I never really, we had talked going into Game 4 in Edmonton. Jake had played more than any goalie in the league, and I think still has. And really, every other team had used 2 goalies other than Florida, who had played less games. So, I mean, there was a conversation. Is he wearing down? He had an upper respiratory thing he was dealing with. There was conversation within our coaching group about, should we give this guy a rest, for a night? Everyone else is using 2. Obviously, Edmonton had used 2. Is their guy fresher? I mean, that's all real conversation that goes on. So, I mean, that was on the table as a conversation as early as Game 4. We didn't make that decision to do that, but we were talking about that. And when you're in that moment, you're making that decision. What's going through my mind is, we need to stop the bleeding here. Our team looked tentative. We're down 2-0. You're in the back of your mind, is he a little bit fatigued? He's been through a lot. He's carried us through 2 rounds. Is he going to be a better goalie in game 6 and 7 for us fresh? And can Casey come in and flip the switch for us here and give us a shot of energy, which he's done all year for us. So, that's the thought process, right or wrong, and I know, listen, but I don't make those decisions lightly, and I don't make them, not to hurt feelings, and I don't, and there's nothing personal in it, and no one's a bigger fan of Jake Oettinger or Casey DeSmith than I am. There's one motive, and that's, how do we survive this and get it to a game 6? And so, and I have to live with those consequences. If it works, great. We're in Edmonton tonight, and you guys are telling me how an awesome a move it was. And when it doesn't, I've got to stand up here and do this. And I understand, but I can't coach. I can't make those decisions out of fear of doing this. I can't. That's not how I'm built.